All right, I just wanted to thank everybody for the opportunity today. One of the greatest honors of being president-elect of this association is the opportunity to introduce our current president. It is my distinct honor today to introduce our president. As we all know, Dr. Caprice Greenberg is a truly accomplished surgical leader. She is a tenured professor of surgery. She's the Mortridge Distinguished Chair of Health Services Research. She's the Vice Chair of Research at the University of Wisconsin. She is the Director of the Wisconsin Surgical Outcomes Research Program. She's over $5 million in research grant funding and over 100 publications. And when we look at somebody and her accomplishments, you sort of wonder, how does this all happen and how can I possibly ever get there? But every story has a beginning. If we think about the beginning, Caprice was born in Chicago, Illinois. She's the first child of Linda and Sam Christian, who are here today to help celebrate this moment with her. He's a Chicago police officer, and her mother is a school teacher. She is the big sister to 3 siblings, Allison, Josh, and Adam. And because her second sibling was born when she was just a year old, she really has provided a great mentorship role to her younger siblings throughout her entire life. And I think that's really been critical to her success in establishing her in her mentorship role today. Family has always been really critical to Caprice throughout her career and her life, and being close to her family and her siblings has really been an essential part of her success in her career. When I talked to her family, I got some insights into Caprice's background, and what I thought was really interesting, it was very clear that you could see the path to success at such a young age. And what her mother said is that she really had just an outstanding work ethic from a very young age. And when I saw this pitch, I realized very early Caprice probably realized that manual labor probably was not where she was going to expend her work ethic, but instead she pursued her academic pursuits at a very young age and found that as her means to success. She also was in grade school, an outstanding student, so outstanding that the principal actually contacted her parents and reached out to her and said that really they felt that she needed the opportunity to attend a private high school, St. Ignatius, because they felt that she needed the opportunities to really develop her skill sets and to achieve everything they thought she was possible. She ultimately was highly successful at that school and ultimately secured a full-ride scholarship through the Police Department of Chicago to attend the University of Chicago, where she graduated in 1994. She then stayed on at the University of Chicago to get her MD and graduated in 1998. I thought it was very interesting when I looked at her CV that she actually won the AAS Student Research Award when she was a medical student at the University of Chicago, sort of a foreshadowing to her future involvement in our organization. Her pathway to become a surgeon occurred in Boston. She went to Brigham and Women's Hospital, where she did her surgical training. During her research time, she went to the School of Public Health at Harvard and got her master's in public health, and then stayed on to do her surgical oncology fellowship at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. When I talked to her mom, what she said that really sort of defined Caprice's success throughout her career is that she has this remarkable perseverance, that she really has set high goals for herself and worked hard to accomplish them, and that she always strived to follow through in everything that she did. So many may not know that Caprice was a runner throughout her life, and that she was a competitive cross-country runner throughout middle school and high school and even into college, and even traveled to Japan to compete internationally in her cross-country. This remarkable perseverance was also sort of demonstrated in her pursuit of her academics. When she was pursuing her research time, she was really interested in pursuing a career in health services research. And this was an area that just wasn't an established career in surgery at the time, and no one really understood what it meant or how you could possibly do that. But Caprice was passionate about pursuing this as an option and decided to commit to getting a master's degree and pursuing this as her research passion, with no funding, no office, and no surgical mentor. And what she did is she found a mentor in medical oncology who served as a great guide for her during her research time. And what she was able to do by following her passion was able to prove to not only her department of surgery, but to the field of surgery, the true value of health services research. And as we've heard earlier, this has evolved from just a few abstract submissions not that long ago to now, I think, 1,100 abstract submissions this year in health services research. This is one of the many quotes that I received from the many people who've worked with Caprice, and I think that it sort of helps to define a little bit about understanding Caprice and her determination. I consistently admire her reaction to adversity. It's like you could throw mud in her face and she would just smile back at you and keep going. So Caprice is really not set back by any challenge in her life, and no matter what comes at her, she keeps a smile and continues to move forward. Her success in her research is demonstrated, by her accomplishments. Within just 2 years of starting on her faculty career, she had 5 independent grants and had secured a $1 million NIH Challenge grant. That's a pace that is just unparalleled in our field. She was then very early in her career, because of this early success, recruited to come to the University of Wisconsin to run and to develop the Wisconsin Institute of Surgical Outcomes Research. She, as a relatively junior faculty member, took on this initiative and has built a world-class research program with now 28 faculty focusing on health services research, over $10 million in research funding, and over 100 publications each year. So this perseverance kind of translates into every aspect of her life. And so while she's been very accomplished in her academic pursuits, she's tried to pursue this in other areas, perhaps not to the same degree of success. So Caprice went on a spa vacation and took a class in photography and tried to learn how to take a selfie. And so this is something she's been really trying to perfect. And I will let you be the judge, but I would say that, I'm not sure that this is really a career that you should pursue, and that perhaps focusing on the things that you're really great on would make more sense. One of those things that you're really great on is being an amazing mentor and collaborator. As I said, Caprice came to Wisconsin as a relatively young faculty member herself and took on a huge burden of mentorship of a huge number of young faculty who were actively engaged and interested in doing health services research, and she has done a phenomenal job in helping to grow and to develop all of their academic careers. I got a few quotes from many of the people that she has mentored over time. I'm not going to read them all to you, but I would just say that the number of emails that I received with the glowing comments from all of her trainees really reflects her commitment to the people that she's worked with over time. I think she is, infectious in her passion for health services research, and her mentees truly value that. She has also shown a phenomenal commitment to our organization in the AAS, and we are delighted to help support her in that role. She's gotten involved in the Executive Council, initially as the liaison to the Surgical Outcomes Club, and then she became the recorder, which is the position that runs this Academic Surgical Congress, which is probably one of the largest positions in our organization, is in a huge amount of work. And she ran our fabulous meeting here in Vegas 2 years ago. She then was elected president-elect and has served this last year as our president, and it has been an honor for all of us on the Executive Council to serve with her. So one of the things about Caprice, despite her phenomenal success in her academic pursuits, is that Caprice, because she was so focused on her research and her surgical training and her career, sort of started to realize that as she was approaching 30, that she was still single, and all of her younger siblings were not. And so she started to realize that maybe this persistence to her career was going to lead to her destined to be single for life. Her parents tried to be supportive and said, you know what, that's okay, not everybody has to get married and you'll have a very successful career. But then she met this guy, Jake. And I know we've alluded to the story, but I just think it's so funny to hear this. So for many of you don't know that Caprice was actually a fourth-year resident when there was a brand new intern, Jake Greenberg, who started at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. And the moment he saw Caprice, he knew this was somebody he wanted to get to know better. So just 1 month into his internship year, he sought out Caprice and he said, I think I need to get your phone number so that we can go out. So Caprice, not really understanding the context of the conversation, said, oh, would you like a mentor? Do you need me to mentor you in research? And Jake was like, I don't think that's really what I'm looking for. So Caprice was not really buying this, so she said, sure, I'll go on a date. They were going to go bowling, and she invited like half the residency to go with so that they weren't alone. And at the end of the date, Jake still felt it was a date, even though there was a lot of people. So he tried to sneak the goodnight kiss at the end, and she very quickly came up to him and gave him a high five. So Jake was not dissuaded by that effort and continued to pursue it, and after many attempts, ultimately was very successful. They realized this was a little bit risque, as chief resident and intern, so they kept it kind of quiet for about 6 months, but ultimately realized that this was probably a relationship that was going to go somewhere, and within 2 years, they were married. They are now celebrating 11 years of marriage. And if any of you know Caprice and Jake, they are probably the most opposite from each other that any two people can possibly be. But because of that, they complement each other perfectly, and I think that that's what's led to the great success in their marriage. So one of the best things about marrying Jake is that gave Caprice the opportunity to develop a family of her own. And they have had 3 beautiful children that they have with them today, Kate, Maya, and Brecker. And anybody who talks to Caprice about her family or asks about her involvement as a mother, knows that this is probably the thing that is most important to Caprice and dictates everything that she does in her life. And I think if there's one way I can describe Caprice, it is she is truly a super mom. She is so dedicated to her family and to everything that she can do that she really is a superhero. Caprice is the person who does everything she can to be engaged in her kids' activities and their schools. I remember having a meeting with her, and she was volunteering at her daughter's school in the morning before she came into work. But she's also, despite her academic pursuits and her travels, has really tried to integrate her family in that and has taken her kids around the world with her and really given them a childhood that dreams are made of. So I just couldn't let this go about the scooter because I think many of you have seen her with a little scooter driving around. So many of you may have heard that this was a skiing accident. And so I know what you're thinking. Wow, Caprice, the super athlete, she was the runner, she's a downhill slalom skier. Actually, this happened on the Bunny Hill. So she's really not a very good skier, and she was there with Brecker, and she just fell on a completely flat surface and hurt her knee. But if you'd like to believe that she was a really good skier and this happened doing a dangerous stunt, you're welcome to. So I think when we think about Caprice and what she does, I think she really helps to define what balance is for a surgical career and for women in surgical careers. She has done not only a fabulous job as a clinician and as a researcher, but in really making her family a focus and a priority. And I think we all emulate what she has been able to achieve in her career. So I think in summary, Caprice Greenberg is a phenomenal surgeon because she is passionate about improving surgical care. She has an outstanding work ethic. She has a remarkable persistence. She is an amazing mentor, and she always prioritizes her family. And it is these characteristics that make her a true model of what a surgical leader should be. It is a true honor and privilege to work with her on the AAS, and I'm honored to introduce her as our president.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you, Becky, for that incredibly kind introduction. So we just heard from 6 of our past presidents about the remarkable history of this association. I'd like to take the next 30 minutes or so to talk to you about our future. I think this is a pretty amazing year for academic surgery overall. Here you see the 2 presidents of the Association of Academic Surgery and the Society of University Surgeons. Rebecca and I have a lot in common. Not only are we both clinicians who treat cancer, we're also both academics and researchers. We're both married to other surgeons. We both have 3 kids under the age of 10. And we're both about to hand off the reins of our respective societies to another woman. I think it's pretty remarkable that right now both presidents and both president-elects are women. So I think you've probably gathered by now that I'm going to be talking about women in surgery. And I think you're probably thinking this is going to be one of those talks about how to have it all, or if we could just get high-quality child care and paid maternity leave, everything would be okay. But I actually want to take this time to try to tell you that that's the wrong conversation. We've been having the wrong conversation for a long time, and I think we need to start having the right conversation. We're a scientific association, and I'm hoping to share with you some data that's pretty irrefutable that we have a serious problem when it comes to gender equity in our discipline. I'm going to mix in a little bit of comedy, because sometimes when you're talking about a difficult topic, it can be the best way to get across a point. And I'm going to end with a few suggestions about where I think we might go. But hopefully, mostly, I'm going to set up my afternoon session. I hope you'll all join us again for the presidential session when I have 4 outstanding speakers to come and talk to you and give you practical advice about how you as an individual can help to move this forward. So what do we actually have to talk about, right? So the first thing is we have to stop talking about parenting issues. And I had a unique opportunity to talk to hundreds of women who happen to both be surgeons and mothers. And I had 100% consensus that right now, the current conceptualization of issues facing women in surgery are related exclusively to parenting and work-life balance. And I want to suggest to you that parenting and other issues of work-life balance are critical for everyone, regardless of gender or parental status. And this is especially true given the data on burnout that we're all so familiar with. There's data to suggest that of surgical trainees, almost 70% meet the definition of burnout. And even among practicing surgeons, about 40% of us are burned out, and over 30% of us would actually screen positive for depression. Suggests we have a problem. There's some other problems with equating women's issues with parenting. The first is that 40% of women surgeons actually don't have children, and it's insensitive, and it distracts from their experiences as surgeons to say that the only problem is related to children. On the flip side, 92% of male surgeons do have children, and many of them want to be involved with their families. And when they're told that parenting issues are a woman's issue, it undermines their desire to feel and take ownership over this important issue in their lives. And because of this, it perpetuates gender schemas and gender roles, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about what I mean by a gender schema. So what are these issues that I want us to talk about? First of all, I want to acknowledge that we have come an amazingly long way, right? There are so many women surgeons. I mean, here we are represented in the leadership. And explicit discrimination and sexual harassment have become less common, and when they do occur, they're simply not tolerated anymore. So this is not our issue. We've really made great strides. And because of that, we can start to focus on the more difficult, more deeply embedded problems. Disparities in salary and advancement in our careers are pervasive. And because these are primarily due to violations of gender schemas and implicit bias, they can be much harder to combat. And it's going to take the entire surgical community to mobilize and combat these threats to equity. I think you know that you're targeting an important topic when it is the subject of a Super Bowl commercial.
What do I tell my daughter? Do I tell her that her grandpa's worth more than her grandma? That her dad is worth more than her mom? Do I tell her that despite her education, her drive, her skills, her intelligence, she will automatically be valued as less than every man she ever meets? Or maybe I'll be able to tell her something different.
Pretty powerful stuff. Okay, so how big is this problem actually? How big is this problem in general, and how big is this problem related to us in surgery? So this is a fantastic paper, and if you haven't read it, I strongly suggest that you do. One of the authors is actually Herb Chen, one of our past presidents, and it talks about women in surgery. And it shows that as we go up, as was alluded to during our panel, the number of women goes down. This is just a pipeline issue, right? It has to just be a pipeline issue. It's not just a pipeline issue. There are issues that start in medical school and continue throughout people's entire career. So this is a study that was published in 2012 that looked at a cohort of physicians that graduated medical school between 1997 and 2002 and entered general surgery residency intending to become board certified. When I first saw these dates, I was like, oh crap, this is an old study. And then I realized that I graduated medical school in 1998. So I'd like to think that this is actually quite modern. So when you look at the predictors of becoming board certified, sex was more significant of a predictor than any other except for advanced age when you graduate from medical school. So if you're 40 and you're just finishing medical school, you're probably not going to go into a surgical residency. Other than that, the greatest predictor is being a woman. It's greater than the amount of debt that you have, it's greater than race, it's greater than any other predictor that was looked at. And so women make up about 30% of these classes between 1997 and 2002, and only 54% of them ended up board certified in general surgery compared to 63% of the men. They were more likely to be board certified in other specialties, and I think we all know women who left surgery to go into more gender-friendly specialties, and they're more likely to not be certified in any specialty. So why would that be? And I'm going to share two different studies done by pretty remarkable female general surgery residents who are studying this problem. The first one comes from the first trial and shows that women residents are more likely to be dissatisfied. Not only are we dissatisfied with issues around our own well-being and health, but we're also dissatisfied with the state of surgery and the state of surgical education. So dissatisfied with patient safety and resident education. And that can lead us to be disillusioned. Another study that was actually selected by the SUS to win one of its awards and be presented internationally at SARS shows that women are more likely to be burned out with an adjusted odds ratio of about 1.6. When asked if they had ever considered dropping out of residency, 50% of women said yes. And this is because, again, more burned out, more disillusioned, feeling less included. These things make it really difficult sometimes to finish. The other really remarkable data that they have is the interaction between gender and home life. So if a woman is single compared to in a committed relationship or married, she actually has less emotional exhaustion if she's on her own. For men, the exact opposite is true. Being in a committed relationship is protective. They have lower emotional exhaustion. They're getting support from their spouse. And the same holds true when it comes to children. Women with children are more emotionally exhausted than women without children, while men with children are significantly less emotionally exhausted. Again, home life, having that balance, helps men and really is a deterrent for women. So what happens once the women actually enter the workforce? Surely if we can make it through residency, then we're going to make it, right? And actually, this study that was published in JAMA in 2015 suggests that, again, the problems in advancement hold true. This was a cohort study where they looked at all of the graduates of residency in 1980, 1990, and 2000 and looked at where they were in terms of rank in 2014. And as you can see, significant differences in those that had achieved full professorship. So again, if we're looking at people in 1980 and then looking at them in 2014, people in academic careers, after 34 years, less than half of the women have become full professors. And again, this isn't a numbers issue, right? We're looking at the percent of people that went into the workforce intending to do that, who have made that achievement. And the numbers aren't any better if you look at the other cohorts. And if we look at us in surgery, again, about an 18% difference in the likelihood of being a full professor. And even if you adjust for everything you can think of, there's still a 5% difference. We also earn fewer NIH grants, and the ones that we do earn are worth less. And there's actually a variety of qualitative studies out there that have actually looked at the comments by study sections, which show implicit bias in comments that are made when the person submitting the NIH grant is a woman. And this really blew my mind. So the UN sent 3 foreign women to the US to assess gender equity, and they were horrified. We do not meet international human rights standards with our 23% gender pay gap. And so here's...
Is your company looking to maximize their output while cutting back on costs? Why outsource all your production to faraway countries like India, China, and Narnia when we have the cheapest and best workforce right here in the good old US of A? Women. That's right. With Pink sourcing, women are a bargain at the workplace since you only have to pay them 77 cents on the dollar. Right, Kathy?
Wait, what? I make 60 cents. Who are you, Bill Gates?
¿De qué? I make 55 cents. Who is she, Yeezy?
No, come on, those are men. Even more importantly, you don't have to pay women overtime. They'll never ask for a raise, and they don't complain about their working conditions. Right, Kathy? Don't forget, women are great at remembering birthdays. They're the only ones who bring baked goods into the office, and they smell nice.
So, they said 77 cents on the dollar. The most recent statistic comes from the Association of American University Women, and it suggests it's 80%. Regardless, that's pretty pathetic. So, how much money is that really? Let's look at this and break it down first by degrees. Clearly, once we get educated, we invest in our education. It must be just as worth it for us to go through all that education. Actually, what happens? It actually increases the disparity. So the gap is actually the largest for women with advanced degrees. Well, we as surgeons and physicians must do quite well, right? Actually, any top 10 list you look at, and I think Sandra Wong showed some of this data yesterday, you see that we're actually always in the top 10 when it comes to the highest, largest gender gaps based on occupation. Here it suggests that we actually make 64 cents on the dollar. So let's look at this for a minute. These are numbers that came from the Medscape General Surgery Compensation Report, and they suggest that across all different types of general surgery, so academics and private practice, there's an $83,000 pay gap between men and women. So how much is that really? So if we take that $83,000, or we take $44,000, which was a recent estimate in a JAMA article that looked at academic surgeons regardless of subspecialty, all right, so we're already talking about a twofold difference here, but you're going to get my point in a second. And let's multiply that over a 30-year career. This is a ton of money. $2.5 to $1.3 million less we're paid over the course of our lifetime. And this shows up. There's data that looks at the net worth of women surgeons and men surgeons, and we have net worth that is significantly less. And it's because we're paid less.
I sat down with 3 members of the U.S. women's soccer team to find out why they're being so greedy.
We're not being greedy. We're just fighting for what's right.
Our contributions to the Federation should be seen as equal to what the men have done.
Fine, whatever. But you need to understand that the men made it to the round of 16 in the World Cup.
Well, we've won 3 World Cups.
Well, they are ranked 30th in the world.
We're ranked number 1.
They play with so much passion.
We have 4 Olympic gold medals.
Humble brags, okay. But how much less could their pay possibly be?
If we win a match, we get $1,300. The men, they get around $17,000.
Whoa.
If the men's team loses, they make $5,000.
5 G's if you lose. Could you imagine having that much money?
Can't really imagine it because we don't get paid anything if we lose.
Maybe that's why you guys don't lose. Silver lining.
Kidding me?
Why don't you guys just pick up second jobs? Uber driving. After your guys' games, surge pricing will definitely be high. Boom, you're driving fans home at 1.5, maybe 2, 3x.
I don't have time to go be an Uber driver. We put in our time to win gold medals for this team.
No. We've brought in, what, $17 million this past year?
The men lost $2 million in profit for the Federation this last year.
Okay, so they win more games, they're ranked higher, and they brought in $17 million to the Federation while the men lost $3 million. There's no economic argument to be made here. People actually watch women's soccer. They don't actually watch men's soccer in the United States. There's literally no reason for there to be a gender gap here. And there's some very interesting data that's starting to come out to suggest that maybe we have a similar situation here in medicine. I'm sure that you saw this article from JAMA Internal Medicine that got a lot of press. And granted, we can argue about how clinically meaningful these differences are, but this does suggest that women have better clinical outcomes than men. And there's some other myths or explanations that have been debunked as what underlies the differences in gender gap. And this, again, comes from that article from Annals of Surgery on the Glass Ceiling, which I really highly recommend reading. So first of all, that pipeline effect. This is disproved by fields that have more than 50% women for over 25 years. If you look at OBGYN and pediatrics, there's still a gender pay gap, and all the leadership roles are primarily still held by men. If you look specifically at surgery, and I think this is where we deviate a little bit from the data on physicians in general, but women are actually more likely to publish their manuscripts after they present their abstracts here at the Academic Surgical Congress, with us having 68% of our abstracts turned into manuscripts where men only have about 50%. Perhaps that's our ability to see things through. Women's work is actually published in higher journals. It's more highly cited. And especially now that we're talking about transformational leadership, women are actually objectively judged to be more effective leaders. So why aren't we more prevalent in the leadership? So let's talk about the pay gap first. And that's, there's a number of actually really concrete reasons for this. The first is that women practice in less remunerative specialties, right? There's many more women in pediatrics and OB. But even if you look within surgical specialties, right? So within OBGYN, it's about 54% women. Breast surgery, we're 64% of the workforce. And those are the lowest paid of all the surgical specialties. If you look at the highest paid specialties, ortho, cardiothoracic, and neurosurgery, single-digit number of women. And the correlation coefficient, I just did this quickly, but between the percentage of women in a specialty and the mean salary has a correlation coefficient of negative 0.74. And for those of you who know statistics, that's a pretty strong correlation. Women also perform lower and unpaid tasks, such as being educators and doing committee work. They're more likely to pass up promotions or leadership and be limited geographically by their spouses. And there are big differences in our ability to negotiate. I'm going to talk about why we come from a position where we are not set up to start on equal footing when it comes to negotiation. And actually, that's going to be one of the topics we're going to tackle this afternoon. And then there's unexplained variation. So how much of this is explained and how much is unexplained? And there's actually two studies, and they both arrive at a remarkably similar number when it comes to how much is explained and how much is unexplained. The first comes from Richmond Jackson at the University of Michigan in JAMA in 2012. They looked at specialty choice. So again, that's a big contributor to this, is that we go into lower paid specialties. They also looked at academic rank, but found about 37% was still unexplained. This next study, which came out in JAMA of Internal Medicine just in 2016, looked at everything they could possibly think of and adjusted for it. Faculty rank, age, years since residency, specialty choice, NIH funding, clinical trial participation, publication count. They even looked at total Medicare payments, right? Oh, this must be because we bill less. Graduation from a prestigious medical school. And despite all of those things, they still found 39% of the pay gap to be unexplained. So we know that this unexplained part is about 40% of the pay gap. So what the heck is going on here? I want to talk to you about gender schemas and gender roles, because I think that this plays a big part here. So I'm going to talk a lot about this book, and I'm going to show it at the end. It's called Why So Slow by Virginia Valiant. This is a fantastic book to read if you're an academic and a scientist. It's all based on research. A lot of it's social science research. It's not the same kind of research that we think about, but it's all very empirically based, and it walks you through explanations for why we have the gender disparities that we do. And it was the most eye-opening book I've read in a very long time. So let's start with some definitions. Sex. Sex categorizes people into two groups based on their reproductive role. This is pretty black and white. Gender are the beliefs or psychological and social conceptions that are assigned to someone based on their sex. Gender schemas are our intuitive hypotheses about the behaviors, traits, and preferences that we expect from men and women. And gender roles are our ideas about how men and women are expected to behave. So gender schemas, again, this is a set of implicit and non-conscious hypotheses about sex differences that distort perceptions. Gender schemas is kind of a kinder, gentler way of talking about stereotypes, just so you kind of can have that concept that you're probably more familiar with in the back of your head. But gender schemas, sort of like any other schema or mental model, is really important to us. It helps us to process information. We play the odds. It helps us to put people into categories so we know what to do with it and how to process it. It's kind of like heuristics. And it plays a central role in shaping men's and women's professional lives. Both men and women have the same gender schemas and begin acquiring them early in childhood. And the most important consequence is that men are consistently overrated and women are underrated by themselves and others. So what are these gender schemas? So this word agentic for men, it comes from agent, so it's capable of independent autonomous action. Men are assertive, they're instrumental, they're task-oriented, and they're competitive. Women, on the other hand, are nurturant, we're expressive and sensitive and warm and communal, and we're concerned about others. Which one sounds like a surgeon? And there's a backlash effect, and this is incredibly well documented across a number of different disciplines. Women are interpersonally penalized for violating gender schemas, and multiple studies show that men and women assign lower status and salaries to women relative to men who engage in self-promotion, have task-oriented speaking styles, have an authoritative leadership style, administer discipline, and initiate salary negotiations. That list sounds like an incredibly important list of things that you have to be able to do to be successful in surgery. Yet, if we do those things, we're going to be penalized. And so I've asked Nicholas Pierce from the Kellogg School of Management to come and talk to us about the position that women start from and the limitations that they have in their ability to negotiate. In fact, data shows that women who are merely being successful in a traditionally male sex-typed occupation, so one that's action-oriented and agentic, and if they're successful, they're disliked and given negative interpersonal characterization simply for being successful in that discipline. Why? Because they're violating gender schemas. There's an implied communal deficit by being successful in an agentic field. Women are especially punished for power-seeking behavior. And I tried to take all of the politics out of my talk, and I took my Hillary Clinton picture out. But I have to say that there is really amazing data about Hillary on this issue. When she is in a position where she is serving as a leader, her approval ratings are very high. But as soon as she runs for office, a power-seeking behavior, those approval ratings fall. And look at what happened to her after the election. What happened? Right back up again. Again, I'm not saying that's why she didn't win the election in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that there are things that happen implicitly in our mind that are related to gender schemas and related to the idea of power and power-seeking among women. And what happens is that people who have communal traits, i.e. women, are actually met with moral outrage when they seek power, because this is so contrary to our gender schema and the gender roles that are expected of us. While men who seek power are actually seen as more competent. What does that say about women trying to succeed in surgery? If we seek power or the ability to influence our career, others' career, the direction of our field, there's a really good chance we're going to be judged pretty harshly. And we're judged pretty harshly. My guess is almost every woman in this room has been called one of these, whether to their face or behind their back, right? We're bitchy, we're bossy, we're selfish, we're an ice queen, we're a battle axe. And so what do? We have to find that sweet spot, right? We have to prove to everyone that we're still a woman. We have to appear both competent and feminine. And this blending of opposites is really, really hard. But if you look at actually the women who are the most successful, they accomplish this. So take this quote on Janet Reno. She's a tough, tough lady. She has a soft, genteel way about her, but she is an adversary of steel. Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, same thing. That's the way people spoke about her. So what happens in the hospital? How do we show that we're communal, right? We have to behave and participate in communal ways that are not expected of men. And this became so blatantly obvious to me once I started dating Jake, and we had this sort of hierarchical difference, right, in how much power we should have had. Yet the things that I had to deal with and he didn't have to deal with were really eye-opening for both of us. So more socialization is expected, right? When you walk on the floor and you need something done, you got to spend a little time, gossip, spend a little time talking, and then kind of slip in, oh, by the way, do you think you could take that NG tube out for me when you have a chance, right? We clean up after our own procedures. I don't think I've ever seen a male resident or attending clean up after their own procedures, but I'll tell you, I don't think I've ever not after one of mine. We pitch in with room turnover, we bring gifts and baked goods, and we're expected to participate in potlucks and baby showers. Again, I bet there's not a lot of men in this room that are asked to bring in a dish for a potluck, yet they always participate. And the problem is one moves along in their career and they start to acquire more power, it becomes much more difficult to blend these communal and these agentic traits, and our gender challenges are magnified. I've been talking to a number of women who are at a similar stage in their career to me, and we all said, we sort of felt like the gender things went away for a while, but now that we're kind of on that edge of taking the next step, it seems like they're rearing their ugly head again. And we're trying to figure out how to reacclimate, to re-get that balance of being that communal feminine woman with that agentic, powerful surgeon. And it's a different balance we need at a different point in our career, and it's really challenging. I want to talk about success and failure, because this is another thing that I think contributes hugely to the differences that we have. So if you think about it, there's really 4 possible explanations for success and failure. It's either due to the ability of the person, the effort they put into the task, pure luck, or the task itself. And I have to admit, again, this comes from the book Why So Slow by Valiant. So when men succeed, the success is attributed to their ability, by themselves and by others. Failure is often attributed to the task or bad luck. And what this does is it allows for men to accumulate knowledge, experience, and confidence in themselves from these small successes over time. Now, what happens with women? When we succeed, it's attributed to luck, hard work, or easier tasks, and thereby implying less ability. Every time I succeed, I find myself saying, boy, was I in the right place at the right time, right? It's never because I was the most able person when it came to that task. And failure is attributed to their ability. And this is affirmation bias, right? We're reaffirming existing gender schemas. If a woman doesn't succeed at a task, it's because she's a woman. It wasn't expected that she would succeed. And therefore, women are unable to learn from their successes and failures. And so what happens over time, right? Men accumulate their successes and their confidence in their ability, and women, we're just confused. It's difficult to understand what went wrong when you're in a situation where you felt like everything went right, and yet you didn't get the position, you didn't get the salary, you didn't get the raise. And so it's impossible to learn from the successes and from the failures because they don't often make sense based on what our perception of reality is. And it leads us to actually sometimes have a decrease in our confidence. And I know I've gone through phases in my life where this has happened, right? Women are much more likely to have the imposter syndrome. Women often feel frustrated and give up on quote-unquote unrealistic goals that would not be unrealistic if they were a man. And as a result, and this is going to start coming up in my slides here for a little bit, they're less likely to apply for stretch positions or promotions. So what's another problem we have that's related to gender schemas? Speaking while female. So this was written by Sheryl Sandberg in the New York Times in 2015. Again, great data on this if you look it up. Women are more likely to be interrupted or shot down when speaking. Male CEOs who spoke were judged to be 10% more competent, while women CEOs who spoke were judged to be 14% less confident. Male senators with more power spoke more often on the Senate floor, yet there was no association between speaking and power for women. And when male employees suggest an idea that leads to new revenue, they get higher performance evaluations, while again, there was no correlation for women. So when we do good things, when we contribute, when we come up with good ideas, it's not actually helping us in the same way that it helps men. Because when we speak, people don't necessarily listen. And this is not explicit. This is not intentional. This is implicit in the way that we process information. So I have a couple quotes, just again to interject a little humor here. So these come from the Washington Post, and they translate famous quotes the way that a woman in a meeting would have to say them. So Dave, if I just really feel like if we had liberty, it would just be terrific, and the alternative would be just awful, you know? It's just how it strikes me. I don't know, right? I mean, how many of you have heard, don't use the word just? It takes me so long to write an email because I have to go through and take out the 4 justs that I put into that email. This is my favorite. I came, I saw, I conquered. Well, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I definitely have been to those places, and boy, I was just honored to be a part of it as our team did such a wonderful job of conquering them. It wasn't me as a leader, it was the team. So again, what happens over time? Women become less likely to advocate for themselves or their positions. They're less likely to engage in the intangibles that lead to promotion. They're less likely to get credit for the work they do, and again, more likely to do the invisible work. They're less likely to apply and be considered for promotions and stretch positions. There it is again. So there's our second contributor. So Obama's staffers found that this was happening in their meetings. I don't know how many of you saw this in the Times, but they came up with a genius strategy to make sure that their voices were heard, and they called it amplification. So when a woman staffer made a key point, another woman staffer repeated it and gave credit to its author. So what did that do? It forced the men in the room to actually recognize the contribution, and it denied them the chance to claim the idea as their own. Again, this is not something that people do implicitly at all, right? I mean, you're in a meeting, an idea comes up, it gets tossed about, right? And then some man who has power at the end says the idea, and we all walk out thinking it was his idea. And there's a good chance that actually there was a woman who suggested it for the first time. And so I've asked Christina Ferroni and Jake Greenberg to actually talk about their perspectives as male and female surgeons on this topic and how some of this stuff plays out. All right, I want to turn and talk about implicit bias and microaggression. Everybody's talking about implicit bias these days. And, you know, I have to tell you, I started thinking about this topic when I was elected recorder 4 years ago. And each year that I've been thinking about this topic, it's become incredibly more and more timely. And I think with the recent election and what's happening right now, people are really talking about implicit bias. So implicit bias is attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Right? They're the result of our gender schemas. And these biases, encompassing both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. Right? This is a really important point. None of us are bad people. None of us explicitly think this way. We all think this way. All of us. Okay? We all have implicit bias, and until we recognize that and embrace it and figure out and get the tools that we need to mitigate the impact of our biases, we're never going to solve these problems. And I have to tell you that once I started putting this talk together and paying attention to myself, and I was saying this earlier to Sharon Weber and Greg Kennedy, 5 to 10 times a day I say some comment that is based in a gender schema, whether it's commenting on someone's clothes, and I happen to like clothes, so, you know, it's just my interest, but really, I don't know if that other person actually appreciates that comment or not, and it's really inappropriate. Or it's talking about the energy level of my 3-year-old Brecker compared to his sisters, Kate and Maya, and the fact that, you know, he's a boy, that's why he's so energetic, while they can sit down and read a book. I am giving them the lessons that girls and boys are different, and it's starting early, and I try to catch myself and correct it as much as I can. But I have spent an enormous amount of time preparing for this talk and reading about these issues, and I still do it. So we really have to understand that we all do it. It leads to microaggression, or comments or actions that are subtly and often unintentionally hostile or demeaning to a member of a minority or marginalized group. So this was one of my favorites. This was, again, we talked about this nonstop when it came to the Olympics, right? Phelps ties for silver in the 100 fly, woohoo! Oh, and by the way, you know, Ledecky just happened to set a world record in the women's 800 freestyle. There's no reason this wasn't reversed. Okay, so just a couple of examples, and these are really common and often used in implicit bias training. So if a white woman or man clutches their purse as a Black or Latino man approaches them, the hidden message is you and your group are criminals. Or an Asian American is complimented for speaking good English. The message is, you're a foreigner in your own country. If a woman is interrupted, or if her ideas are attributed to a male colleague, the hidden message is, your ideas are not as important as those of your colleagues. So once again, we're not talking about blatant discrimination. We're talking about small, invisible, unintentional messages that we are constantly sending to the women in surgery that says, you are not as important. So this was a very interesting study that was done, and what they did was they actually sent out CVs to a number of companies, and the only thing that they changed on these resumes was the name. So it was either Emily or Greg, which are pretty Caucasian-sounding names, versus Lakeisha and Jamal. And you can see here the marked difference in callback rates, simply based on whether the name appeared to be Caucasian or African American. There's no explanation, exactly the same credentials, exactly the same resume. You just changed the name at the top. And a similar study was done and actually published in PNAS, and this is just fascinating. So they sent out to faculty, again, identical CVs where the only thing they changed was whether it was a woman applying or a man applying for a faculty job. And you can see the statistically significant differences here in how competence was judged, how hireable the person was, and whether or not they were interested in mentoring them. But this was the striker. This is the difference in salary that they thought should be offered. Again, $4,000 difference, simply based on a woman's name versus a man's name. And this is something that we really have to tackle. We have to tackle this from both sides of the negotiating table. And I challenge those of you who are out there in leadership positions to think about the greater good of our discipline a little bit when you're thinking about the financials of your department or your institution. And if a woman comes to you with a first offer where she is very obviously lowballing herself, think about whether or not you want to take advantage of that situation and continue to perpetuate this. Or if you want to perhaps think about a way that you could subtly suggest that maybe she would like to submit a different offer. Okay, this is my favorite. So I don't know if you guys have found this Twitter handle, but it's Man Who Has It All. I would suggest that before you say something to a woman, think about how it would sound if you switched the gender of the person you were talking to or talking about. So I have absolutely nothing against fathers in the workforce as long as they can concentrate on the job. Being successful is about being equally handsome on the inside and out. And men, if you want to speak up in a meeting and want to be taken seriously, dress smart, but not too smart, stay calm, and overall avoid appearing too ambitious. So I think campaigns like this, I Look Like a Surgeon, helps people to raise awareness that our society is changing. It's just instead, the phenotypes are changing academically and the phenotypes are changing socially. So what do we do about this? What do we do about implicit bias? I think this was a fascinating solution that they came up with in the musical world. So there was a real lack of women and minorities when it came to professional symphony orchestras. And so what they did was they actually instituted blinded auditions. And in fact, they realized that they could discriminate whether or not it was a man or a woman based on the heels, so they actually had to put a carpet down to make sure that they couldn't hear the women walking in. And look at what happened, the percentage of women in the orchestra when they moved to blinded auditions. So that was purely based on talent and not based on implicit bias or implicit assumptions about the person sitting before you. What this suggests is that implicit bias is actually a remedial habit. And I'd like to suggest to you that this is a fantastic conceptual framework that was put forth by a woman named Molly Carnes at the University of Wisconsin. Molly's been continuously funded for over 20 years by NIH to study gender differences in academics. I would really suggest looking up her work. It's really fascinating what she's done. But here she suggests that implicit bias is something that can be remediated. It's based on awareness, motivation to change, self-efficacy. Gosh, I wore my contacts, not my glasses, so I can't read that. But eventually you get to action. And I'd like to suggest actually that even the best of us are somewhere here, where we're motivated to change, we're motivated to learn about these things, we recognize that there's a problem, but we haven't quite figured out where to go. And so I've asked Brian Gittins, who's our Associate Dean for Human Resources, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Wisconsin, to talk to us this afternoon. And he's actually going to have an exercise, which I found to be one of the most enlightening experiences in my academic career, on implicit bias, so I hope you'll be there. So justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. And I think that Hermione had it right when she went to the United Nations with her idea of the He for She campaign. Men, I would like to take this opportunity to extend your formal invitation. Gender equality is your issue too. He for She has signed up fathers who want to raise empowered daughters, leaders who know their societies will be stronger when there are as many women in parliament and business as men. And I think we also start to see this. You know, we have a number of senior male surgeons who now have daughters who are surgeons and other professionals and are starting to see the struggles that their daughters are facing. And somehow it makes it much more real, much more personal when it's an individual you know socially who's struggling with some of this stuff. And so I'd like to introduce you to my He for She. Jake Greenberg. It's the right partner. We couldn't be more different, they're right. I think Jake's going to spend some time talking to you about the incredible experience that he had when he got to take care of our daughter Kate when she was a month old for 6 weeks when I went back to my fellowship, and how that 6-week paternity leave set us up to be equal partners when it came to our home and our kids in a way that never would have happened had he not had that time. He couldn't claim incompetence when it came to changing a diaper. He couldn't claim incompetence when it came to giving her a bottle because he did it for 15 hours a day when I was at the hospital. Jake also loves to cook, and he cooks dinner, and I get home after he does, and there's a dinner waiting for me on the table. I am so fortunate to have found Jake as my partner. This is us when we were young and carefree on our honeymoon. We look pretty young. I have to say, if it hadn't been for Jake, I probably would have been one of those 46% of women who didn't make it through residency. I had some tough times that I really struggled, and he was and continues to be my rock. Don't laugh at me, Maya. He helps me to interpret my reality. When I feel the imposter syndrome setting in, he sits me down and he talks to me about all my accomplishments, and he tells me, if I'm an imposter, what does that make everybody else? He encourages me to apply for leadership positions. He encourages me to strive for equality. He made me pull back my first offer, my first suggested offer when we went to Wisconsin, and up it by a significant amount of money. And so we need to do that for each other. It doesn't have to be your husband, but we need to help each other to understand our realities, to understand whether or not what we're interpreting is real. Jake, I couldn't have done this without you. I love you more than you'll ever know, and you're the best husband and father I could imagine. Thank you. So I'd also like to thank my parents, who are the other two people that I'd really attribute with my ability to be standing here today. They might not always understand what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, but they're always there when I need them. They provide me with the support, especially in residency, and even now I call my mom often on my way home from work, and she offers me the encouraging words that I need, and they're enough to help me get through. And my dad, so there was a point where I was really struggling. I had some stuff going on in my personal life. I was in Boston in residency, and he could just tell over the phone when my voice didn't sound right. So next thing I knew, he was at my doorstep. So he drove from Chicago to Boston to take me out to lunch to make sure I was okay. And it's that model of commitment to the family, of integrity, of honesty, of hard work that helped me to get here. So I'm very grateful to you guys. Thank you for your role modeling. Thank you for your support. I'd also like to thank Howard and Emily Greenberg, who live in Philadelphia. Along with my parents, I want to thank all 4 of you for your willingness to come to Madison and pitch in and help us with the kids, especially when Jake and I travel. We couldn't do it without you guys. I want to thank you for welcoming me into your family with open arms. And mostly I want to thank you for raising the son who has the confidence and the temperament to be my equal partner in the life that we've built. Damn, I wasn't gonna do this. And I haven't even gotten to the kids. And here's the most important part of that life. Kate, Maya, and Brecker. Kate's our 9-year-old. She loves soccer. She's got her father's personality, an outgoing approach to life. Her whole face lights up when she smiles, and she keeps me laughing. Maya, my little mini-me. Her intelligence, her kindness, and her sense of wonder absolutely astound me every day. And Brecker. Hey, honey, take off the headphones. He is the happiest, most well-adjusted, most funny, most loving little boy you can possibly imagine. Kate and Maya, I appreciate so much the way that you guys little mommy each other and your brother. It makes it so much easier for me and Daddy when we have to go to work to know that you guys are taking care of yourselves and each other in the way that you are. And there is nothing that makes me happier than opening that door after a long day at work and hearing 3 little voices yell, "Mommy," and the pitter-patter of those running hugs. It makes it all worth it. So thank you so much for everything that you guys do and the way that you have really enriched our lives. I'm so proud of you, and I'm so proud to be your mom. So here we see the people that have really had an impact on my career, and there's a lot of them, and this is far from inclusive. But I do want to point out a couple of people who have really embodied some of the things that I've talked to you about today that I think we need to do. The first, Mike Zinner. When I was in the lab, as it was mentioned, I sort of went out without a mentor, without a plan, without a whole lot of anything. You know, I was moonlighting every other night to make my salary and pay my tuition at the School of Public Health. But Dr. Zinner believed in me, and over time, we actually submitted an abstract to the American Surgical, which ended up being the highest scored abstract, and so I got to go first. And I was the only woman and the only resident to present that year, but he let me present because it was my work. And not only did he let me present, but he actually let me field the questions, which doesn't often happen there. And he stood right next to me, ready to jump in if he needed to. The other thing that he did was he empowered me and he resourced me to start the Surgical Outcomes Club, which has become a defining part of my career. And I am so, so grateful for that opportunity. Leaving Boston, one of the hardest things for us was leaving Dr. Zinner. Dr. Soy-Bell. He has been a lifelong friend, mentor, and confidant to me. I remember one day I was sitting in his office, and he had this office kind of in the basement on the way to the surgical education office, and we were just sitting in there, and he said, "You know, someday you should be the president of the AAS." Here I am. Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge the 3 leaders at the University of Wisconsin, Bing Rickers, Craig Kent, and Herb Chen. They believed in me, they found me, they brought me in, they resourced me to start a program in whatever vision I came up with. And they supported me to make sure it became a reality. And for that, I am eternally grateful. I'd like to acknowledge the past presidents of the AAS. What Lillian said is true. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And I am so grateful for the modeling that you did on the way to run this organization and keep it moving forward. Thank you to Christina Kassendorf and the AAS administrative staff. And thank you to Rebecca Minter and the SUS leadership. It was a joy to work with you all on the core calls for this meeting. And finally, my 4 fellow officers, Becky, Adel, Carl, and Cliff. It's just been my honor and privilege to serve with you, and I look forward to the next few years we have together. The AAS is a remarkable organization. We are the innovators, we are the thinkers, we are the leaders. And I challenge each of you to be a leader when it comes to these issues that we face in gender in surgery. And here's just a short list that I came up with of some systemic interventions we can do. First of all, we need transparent, objective compensation plans. No matter how objective it seems, they're all opaque in some way. We need blinded manuscript grant hiring and promotion practices. There's no reason you need to see the name or the gender of the person to evaluate their work. We need explicit, purposeful, and fair distribution of uncompensated teaching and service workloads, or we need to figure out how to compensate it appropriately. We need equal leave policies and tenure clock extensions, and we may have to force some of the men to take that leave, but it is important. And I know there's some different views on that issue. We need objective measures of success and milestones for promotion that are defined a priori and explicit so everyone knows the rules. And we need to institute educational programs on implicit bias and its impact, and I know a number of universities are already moving forward with that. But there are things that you can do as an individual too. You need to look for opportunities to acknowledge women's contributions, and you need to use amplification. If somebody says a good idea, repeat it, acknowledge it, say who said it. Recognize and acknowledge microaggressions and comments or assumptions based on gender schemas. Do what I've been doing. Apologize to somebody when you say something inappropriate and catch yourself. Before you say something to a woman, think how it would sound if you said it to a man. Actively encourage women to apply for leadership and promotion. We're not going to do it on our own a lot of the time. Sometimes we need a little nudge. And most importantly, admit that you have gender bias and educate yourself on how to mitigate that impact. And to that extent, I challenge you. I have 3 things I would like each and every person here to do before you leave Las Vegas. First of all, show up at 1:15 for our presidential session. I'm with her, mobilizing the surgical community to alleviate gender gap in surgery and continue to learn about these issues of implicit bias, the problems we face with negotiation, and the way that gender issues show themselves in the hospital. Read the Association of Women Surgeons statement on gender salary equity that came out a few weeks ago. It has incredibly insightful suggestions for what you can do to help fight gender inequity within surgery. And read about these issues. If you need light reading, read Lean In. If you want something that's a little more empirical, read Why So Slow. We all read about leadership, we all read about surgery. I challenge each and every one of you, whether you're male or female, to read about the issues that we face when it comes to gender equity. And with that, it has been my honor and privilege to serve as your president. Thank you for your attention.